Hello, welcome back to another episode of The Grapevine. My name is Susan.
I'm Sherry.
I'm Susie.
And we wanted to first off introduce our new hostess with us. It's Sherry. Yay. She's going to be with us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining.
We are excited for today's episode. We have Linda Riley with us, and she is a marriage and family therapist from Winter Park, Florida, and she has over 35 years of clinical experience. Today we're going to be asking her some pretty important questions about husbands and wives and how we can better our communication skills, especially when it comes to difficult topics. So first off, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you. Yeah, so this topic, I mean, it can be a difficult one, right? Right, girls?
There's a lot of subtopics within it.
Yeah,
so yes.
It is. I know me, like just myself, I have a ton of different questions. And the first one that I think of, and when I think of difficult conversations with a husband and wife to have that result in, I guess, a peaceful outcome is sometimes expenses and really like spending differences. Right. So not only like just the topic itself and it being something stressful, but like what if they don't see eye to eye with that topic?
Well, you're right. Finances are a big common thing that couples fight about, finances. I think that in regards to like budgets, sometimes it is necessary to do a budget, but it doesn't work well like when the husband does the budget and just gives it to the wife. We need to remember that marriage is a team effort, and we should function as a team and make decisions for the team, what's best for the team. So I think it works best when couples sit down and make that budget together, and then they agree together to do it and accept personal responsibility. And that way, if they don't stick to it, one or the other, they can come back and maybe tweak it, or at least have discussion about why it
so hard to stick
is
with.
difficult. Yeah, it needs to feel equitable too. Sometimes women feel that they're on a budget, but their husband isn't, kind of thing. You know, he buys what he wants, but restricts my buying. So that's why I think that both people should do it. And I also think it's important that women know about finances. Because if you don't know anything about finances, and this is happening less in younger generations like yours, but even in my generation, a lot of women would maybe be married 20, 30 years and then get a divorce, and they've been taken care of all those years, and they don't know the first thing, they don't know where the money is, they don't know how to manage the money. And I think that a real partnership, you should be able to talk about money. Although I agree, it's a very difficult topic to talk about without conflict.
So is that like one of the top reasons? I know infidelity obviously causes a lot of divorces, and is finance or mismanagement of finances, is that like one of the top reasons for divorce, at least in this country? Or I mean,
well, I really wouldn't say it's a top reason for divorce. I think people more or less stay in marriages and just keep arguing about it.
Right.
You know, but it certainly doesn't help create a really happy relationship if we can't figure out how to compromise and resolve it. I think more likely what, other than affairs, what really ruins relationships is resentment, because people cannot communicate. And they either are passive and then become passive aggressive, or they don't say anything, and then one day they just kind of blow up. And that kind of resentment is really difficult for eroding positive feelings. In fact, I think what it does is it makes that feeling of being in love dormant. So people then conclude they're not in love with that person, maybe even going so far as separations and divorces, and then later realizing that they really were in love, but they just didn't deal with all the issues. So I think it's resentment, and I think the key to keeping that from happening is learning how to resolve conflict and be able to listen and share thoughts and feelings in respectful ways. And if you can do that, then you can have all the tools you need to really negotiate everything and have a happy marriage.
So
but
interesting.
But it's hard to do.
It is hard to do. And so, like, you know, it's funny, like I could ask, like, what do you recommend, one account or two accounts, or budgets or no budgets, but it doesn't even matter, to your point. Like, if there is, you know, no communication that's respectful between the couples. So can you maybe help us understand, I know you shared with me previously tips on how to effectively communicate and respectively communicate with your spouse.
What are the tools out there that'll help?
Yeah, as far as like 2 bank accounts, 1 bank account, I don't think it really matters. But the thing that does matter is not to have secrets and secret bank accounts, because there is such a thing as financial infidelity. And so it's just another way to really cheat. Is to cheat with the money. And as long as you're open about the money and your husband knows that how much money you have in your account, you know what he has in his account, maybe you've worked out that you pay certain bills and he pays other bills, I don't think it's a problem. It's really the hiding of money and the dishonesty that feels just as bad as any other form of cheating.
So that secret stash that some women put away for like those emergencies, if you know the husband loses a job or something, that's not a good thing. Because sometimes women, I mean, I know of women, or you know, we all have like a little bit of cash on the side, not just because we're hiding, but because, you know, if something happens and there's not enough in the savings, this is going to cover stuff. So it's not really like stealing or infidelity. It's more like I'm putting away some of the money that I want to not spend. And
I think that it's good to have rainy day, you know, account and a savings account. Is just maybe not hiding it.
Right.
Again, if you feel a need to hide it, then something's wrong, and you should probably get in therapy if you feel a need to hide it, because then you're picking up that you don't feel safe, you don't feel like you can trust your partner. That's a big issue. If you, I mean, trust is the foundation of a good marriage. So if you're hiding money, it would have to be because you fear that maybe the marriage isn't stable. Maybe, you know, your husband might leave you, or it could be the other way, a man feeling his wife might leave him. Because everything kind of goes both ways nowadays. So saving money on the side like that is probably a good thing. And when there's trust in a marriage, it's not like partners want to look and check the bank account and check, you know, a lot of checking indicates that somebody isn't feeling safe and secure here.
It's more like not putting it in the bank because we don't want to touch it, so we just put it somewhere else. I mean, he's aware of it, just we don't want to be able to easily access
now,
it.
on the other hand, if you are in a relationship with someone that's abusive in any way, or threatening or scary in any way, then saving money on your own would probably be wise. So, but what I'm talking about is how do we create a happy, healthy, well-functioning relationship where we don't hide things, right?
So how do you advise your clients to discuss what is considered, what should be a budget and how much it should go into it? So let's say a husband doesn't think that a wife should be spending whatever amount on shopping, but she feels that she needs it because of how often she needs to change outfits or such. So how do you advise them to communicate about what is a reasonable need for either, like for it to be a budget?
Well, you know, I don't give specific advice on it, but I tell them they have to sit down, they have to really, you know, explore it. Because if you don't feel it's equitable or you don't feel it's reasonable, it's not going to work, right? It's not going to work. So I think just reasoning with one another. If you feel like you're too restricted and you don't have enough money for this or that is an important priority in your life, you just need to bring that forward and talk about it and see whether or not you can maybe tweak it in some other way, right? I mean, I use that word a lot in marriage because it's really, as well, no, it's impossible to live a balanced life all the time. But we want to strive to live a balanced life. But we have to constantly be looking at it and making little adjustments. Am I spending enough time with my children? Are my husband and I going out enough? You know, do I have enough time for myself? You know, maybe I'm unhappy and irritable because I don't have enough time for myself. So it's that being in touch with your feelings, and then the ability to communicate to your husband in an honest, open way why you feel the way you do, and hoping that he will do the same thing. Because a lot of men, particularly when they're supporting a woman and a family and working very hard to do so, that's a big issue with men, that she has no respect for how hard I work, and she just, blows money, and it can become, a chronic problem.
Right.
And most of the time I see people honestly not divorcing over that, but it causes so much misery, and it impedes them from really growing and maintaining that feeling of happiness and being in love.
Right.
Because there's constant resentment, perhaps on both sides.
Well, I know that one thing that I think like one theme that I keep hearing is respect.
Yeah.
And it sounds like 100% like any of the situations, like I've got questions about raising kids, and I've got questions about so many things for you, but the question that keeps coming up, or the theme, is really respect. So how can a couple respectfully communicate so that they resolve conflict? Like, what are tips for that?
Well, if couples can't listen to one another and then speak in respectful ways, they should get professional help right away, because you're not going to proceed in any kind of healthy way if you can't communicate right off the bat. And it is hard, but what we do in therapy is we teach and it's common in the field of marriage and family therapy. We teach what's called a conflict resolution model, which we give people steps on how to resolve conflict. Because maybe they have good communication in a lot of areas, but they have one particular area. It could be finances, it could be child rearing, it could be anything. Family of origin, mother-in-law, anything that they cannot talk about, right? One thing or two things that they just cannot talk about without having conflict. And a lot of people, maybe a few more women, but men can have this issue too, are what we call conflict avoiders. And so they don't want to rock the boat, they can't deal with conflict, and so they kind of repress their feelings. And as I've already mentioned, that doesn't really work well. So in this conflict resolution dialogue, one of the things I really think is important to stress is that research has shown that it's more important that you are capable of processing your conflict and talking about it than it is actually resolving it. Dr. Gottman, who's done probably more research on marriages than anybody else, he talks about couples having what he calls perpetual issues, perpetual conflicts that maybe have to do with personality differences. Maybe one is introverted, one is extroverted, and they're constantly fighting because the introverted one wants maybe his wife to stay home, and the wife wants her husband to socialize and go out. So that issue is not going to really change, and it might be perpetual. But the important thing is not to sweep it under the rug, but keep dialoguing about it. Because if you can keep expressing feelings and try to work it out, by talking about it and keeping it on the table, it's not going to be that damaging. Sometimes you can even joke about those differences if you know that your partner is willing to sit there and listen to your feelings about it. So that's one thing. So in the conflict resolution dialogue, what we teach people to do is to start talking and to have a designated speaker and a designated listener. And sometimes I'll tell them I used to have people hold a pen, now I say hold the cell phone, because we have our cell phones on. So they make a commitment that only one person is going to talk at a time. And it's amazing what happens when you really listen. And you can't talk, so you're not reiterating in your head your defense, but you're really listening to them. It makes a huge difference. Sometimes you don't really care if someone at least will listen to you and can try to make some progress to understand you. Then you don't get as angry or not as upset because somebody's validated your feelings. So we do that. And then when the listener is listening, the speaker, when the speaker is talking, the listener, then he pauses, because another mistake we make is just going on, right? And particularly men can't follow too much, and they get lost.
Going on and on.
Right? They get lost and they tune out. You know,
Right.
women do better. Research has shown, again, Dr. Gottman's research, to quote some, but in general, that women do better in, we just have more tolerance for emotional conflict communication. And men get what Dr. Gottman calls flooded, which means that they can quickly get physical symptoms of their blood pressure going up, their heart rate, their pulse,
funny.
and they're really feeling stress. It's that fight or flight, and that's why men often tune out or walk out of the room or just refuse, to talk. Right. So being aware of that, for men to be aware of that, and to monitor it, and for women to know that that's okay, that's all right, that's a physiological response to conflict that feels threatening. It's oftentimes men feel there's no point in talking about it, or maybe women do, that we can't resolve it, so why talk about it? So if you're monitoring that in yourself and in your partner, and you see that one of you is it's escalating, then you take a break. Because you're at that point.
Yeah, you have to.
At that point, the person that's feeling all of that isn't capable of really listening. So you just take a time out, like we give kids, and it can be 20 minutes. Like let's have a cup of coffee. I might say, let's have a cup of tea, or let's go have lunch, and just set it aside. And you think, as I'm saying this, that, how do you set aside a fight?
I was.
But when you really learn this, and your partner does want to hear what you're thinking, does want to resolve it, you can get so good that you can actually do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the dream right there.
Cool.
You take a break.
That means you're able to step back from the emotions.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, they honor the fact that they're trying to resolve it. It's difficult, and like I said, so what if it takes several conversations? That's better than sweeping it under the rug or having a big fight where nobody's listening to anybody.
When is the best time? Because, I know for me, when something happens, my immediate response is, we're resolving this right now. It's just, it's that's just my personality.
Yeah.
So, but probably not the most effective. Because in the heat of the moment, it's probably not the most wise time
Especially
to
if the
try
kids are around.
Yes,
Oh my
and
goodness.
especially when the kids are
Can't wait
around.
for them to go to
Exactly.
bed.
Well, and that brings me to the whole, what if it has to do with the kids? What if you are unhappy with, the way maybe your husband or something is disciplining the kids, or not disciplining the kids? That happens sometimes in people's house. So how do you handle that? Do you address it right then, or?
Well,
I wouldn't do it around I'm sorry to cut. I wouldn't do it around the kids, because I think when the kids see that they can turn you against each other, they've got a good weapon to continue to do that.
Conquering divide.
Yeah, exactly. Where they're like, all right, this is how we're going to work it each time, make them fight, and then we're kind of
in the clear.
scot-free. So I would wait till they're
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do that.
It is hard. It is hard.
Wait
Well,
and revisit.
some things we do need to talk about right away if it's a big thing that's going on that you're really upset about. But most of the time, we actually should try this method, and this again has to do with the conflict resolution dialogue, is to say to your partner, or your partner has a right to say it too, we need to have a dialogue. And we don't really use that word dialogue. So I think it can be helpful, because it can indicate, remember what we learned in therapy, or this is a big talk. Now you don't, some people are opposed to it and will just say, we need to have a talk. But somebody who is upset asks their partner for time, and then you let your partner choose a time instead of just hitting them. Because a lot of times conflict goes bad immediately if you hit someone when they walk in, when they walk in the door at night, or when the kids are finally down and maybe, one of you is looking forward to just watching television or having some free time, and boom, you just don't want to talk about it then. So letting your partner choose a time, it should be within a 12 to 24-hour period, gives your partner a chance to say, you know what, I don't have the energy to get into a big discussion, and this is important, and I want to hear what you say. I care about your feelings. How about if we do it, it's Thursday, let's try to do it Friday morning. Let's try to get up a little earlier, or let's do it on the weekend. Let's make arrangements for someone to watch over the kids, and we'll just sit at the kitchen table and we'll do it then. And when you've experienced the success of something like that, I mean, for that to work, you have to have the confidence that your partner will remember that he made that commitment. So I always say the person that makes the appointment and says we'll talk then has to remember it, because it isn't right then that the other person has to say, remember, you committed. You're taking responsibility to say, I care about you, I will listen to your feelings, because isn't that really core? I mean, don't we all, if we think about how do we define a good marriage, well, we all want somebody that will listen to us when we're upset. I mean, minimally, right?
Right.
Somebody that is there for us and will listen to us. So respecting your partner in terms of maybe choosing the time, you can learn to do that if your partner also takes that seriously. If he says not now but later, that he really brings it up later. And once that's happened a couple of times, then you learn that you can really trust your partner. And as I said before, it's the process more than the resolving the conflict, because things really change when you openly listen to your partner. Because we're really bad at listening, especially when we're upset. We're really bad at listening. But when you really quiet down and it's not your turn to talk. So again, another part of it is sometimes saying, what I hear you saying is this. So if you don't go on too long, you take a little break and your partner feeds it back, and then you have the option of saying, your partner says, yes, that's what I said, you heard it, or that's not what I said at all, let me say it again, or that's part of it, but I think you missed a really important point. And then you go on, and one of the things that is highly unusual in conflict resolution is the partner listening says, is there more? In other words, we don't rush the speaker so we can get our turn to talk. We just want them to say everything they have to say, and then we can give our point of view.
I need to write these down. These are really
And it really is
mentally memorize.
It's super hard to learn, but once you learn it, it is so empowering. It's so empowering to be able to do that, because even if somebody's really angry at you, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, maybe with a child, somebody's really angry at you and they usually attack by saying something just mean, something to push your buttons. And if you can stay calm and say, wow, you really feel that way, tell me about it. And then you listen to them. What you see is almost like the air going out of a balloon. The anger just kind of calming down. Sometimes it'll go to emotion and tears, because anger is a secondary emotion, and we're angriest when we're hurt, when we really feel hurt.
Wow, that's
but
really...
it's hard to be vulnerable and express the hurt. It's much easier to
secondary emotion.
Just be angry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you're absolutely right. Like, really, anger stems from something else deeper.
Yes.
So, and it's funny because, like, when I think of me trying to resolve a conflict, I think of like anger and then more anger and then anger and then more anger. And so you're not even, actually getting to the root cause, probably. You know what I mean? If the anger is stemming from something else, then
and as Christians,
you're not even really solving anything.
We kind of have an advantage as Christians, because instead of reacting right away, sometimes that's really a shame, because we don't even know the circumstances, and when we hear them, we're like, oh.
That is very,
But one of the things
true.
that we can do as Christians is we can, if we take the time to pray about it, and sometimes really say, because the Holy Spirit is the revealer of truth, and that's all truth, and it takes courage to see the truth, and to, courage to see yourself, and maybe just being able to ask God through prayer, why am I so upset about this? You know, why did I have such a big reaction when he did this or she said that? Because if you take that time in prayer and you think about it before you actually have the conversation, I find that the Holy Spirit gives it clarity. And then you can maybe approach the dialogue with your husband in a more sensitive, less attacking sort of way.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that, and definitely wouldn't want to do it in front of the kids, especially because anger is like the first thing that's going to come out. I definitely like to keep the front of team mentality, even if I'm
Not feeling
against
it.
everything that my husband just did with the kids or the way he disciplined them. I'm like, But I don't want the kids to see it because the kids really, they take advantage, especially as they get older and we're outnumbered, so it's really...
But you know, it's also good for kids to see a model of conflict resolution. Because sometimes if kids never see their parents have any conflict, then they have no clue how to deal with it when they have it.
Their expectations.
Right, when they have it with their friends.
So
or
true.
what. And I think it's a huge advantage when you're young and you first get married to have had good models. Those people who grew up in a home where their mother and father loved one another, but they had conflicts, but they resolved it. It wasn't scary. Nobody threatened to leave, and nobody was abusive, right? Maybe there was a little yelling. That's not the worst thing, as long as there's no abusive conversation, talk. Those kids are at an advantage because they already know that people that love each other can have conflict. And people can work that conflict out, and it doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be threatening. So that's good too. But you would have to be good at it to be able to, maybe sometimes just saying to the kids, putting on a movie and saying, Daddy and I have to go and talk because we're upset at one another. Kids know it anyways. And we need to go and talk and work it out. So give us some space and time to do it.
That seems healthy.
Is tone of voice around the children something that we need to be careful with? Like, is that like...
Yes, absolutely it is. But the interesting thing about families and relationships and marriages is that they don't all look alike. There are some really great marriages where the couple is very volatile. Very volatile. And you just even think about different cultures. Some people grow up in families where everybody shouts and says whatever they want and everybody's opinion is heard. And then, then maybe they cry and they resolve it. And so I think it's not really accurate to say that we always have to have a perfect tone of voice. I mean, we can be upset, and when you grow up in a home like that, your tolerance for affect is wide, right? Where if you grow up in a home where there was mom and dad had no conflict, but they weren't happy. There was no affection, but they had no conflict. You get the wrong idea about that because people do have conflict.
We clash on many things.
One of the things that I think is the very most important thing to remember is, I tell everyone this, if you avoid conflict, you avoid intimacy, because you can't have intimacy without being really super real, right?
That's so
About
true.
your feelings and your
Very
thoughts.
true.
That's very interesting.
Which brings us to one of our next questions, actually, about intimacy. I'll ask, I don't mind. So how do you bring up feeling unsatisfied, whether sexually or emotionally, so that it is constructive? And in our culture, from women that I speak, I'm in a marriage that I'm not married to someone within our culture. I'm married to an outsider, foreigner, as they called it before, which is very interesting. I don't know why they said that, but I don't really have that problem where I can speak about certain things with my husband. But I know with the Egyptian culture, the women aren't saying anything to their husbands about something that is not satisfying. And I guess, I don't know if it's, they don't want to offend their husbands, or it's just such a taboo subject, but how can at least women in our culture be able to speak to their husbands or bring up whether they are feeling sexually unsatisfied or emotionally
let's take
unsatisfied?
sex for an example. And I'm certainly not saying it's always easy. But I am of the belief that we can say anything, we can find a way to say anything, any feeling we have that's true, in a way that will not make someone really defensive. So if you take sex and you feel that your husband maybe is really selfish lover and he really isn't concerned about pleasuring you, you certainly know that if you start attacking him in a negative way about his inabilities or lack of good lovemaking technique, you know that's not going to go well, right? But if you addressed it in a way of saying, you know, our relationship is number one priority for me, and our sexual relationship is important too, and I think that we could make it better. I think we could really make it better. There are some things that may be hard for me to share with you, but maybe if I did, you know, we could make it better. Because a sexual relationship is no different than a relationship in the sense that two people co-create the relationship. Well, two people also create their sexual relationship. And I think sex is often misunderstood in Christian communities. You know, often we inadvertently give our children negative sexual messages, and we need to recognize that sex is a wonderful, awesome gift that God gave us, and it's a glue in marriage. I mean, people who do have a good sexual relationship, they're going to resolve their conflicts because they're not going to like being disconnected emotionally or physically.
Right.
You know,
and
so
I know when I think about the 5 love languages too, like I know even in looking at that, it's like, you know, the different, like how do you, knowing the love language of your spouse and making sure that, because you could be telling them all day long, you know, that they are fantastic, but maybe they speak to physical touch, like maybe that is their language, right? And a lot of men, like really physical touch is one of them. So, you know, that's usually more so the men's love language. It obviously could be the woman's as well, but it's just so important to make sure that that relationship is solid too. But it's so funny, like when you break it down like that, it doesn't sound like such a taboo topic. It comes down to, again, I heard lots of like we, right? Like it's not like
it's
you.
a team. It's a team.
It is a team.
Not attacking. It's not attacking. It's respectful. And then, so would you recommend after saying something like that, having the husband maybe say it back to make sure he understood? Or
Well,
I'm just trying to get this technique down.
I don't think that every.
I'm trying to learn.
Yeah, I don't think that every time you bring up a topic, it's necessarily a conflict. You know, so no, I don't think you have to feed back everything. That's when you're so emotional that you really are having a hard time listening non-defensively. Right. But just, you know, there are certain times, you know, you made a good point. There is a difference in the love language of affection. I mean, affection can be very different than sex. But the primary way men connect is sexual, physical. The primary way women connect is emotional. And the two are so tied together that for women to want to make love to their husband, they have to, anything that interferes with them feeling positive about their husband, it could be a roadblock, right? So they have to have that trust. They have to feel emotional connection. And a lot of men don't understand that. You know, they would be more apt to want to connect emotionally after sex, but women need it, you know, before sex. So if you just recognize that this is important, I don't think sex is the most important thing, but I think it's very important. It's the one thing that distinguishes a marital relationship from other close relationships that we have, like with a sister, a best friend, or our mother. We have some pretty intimate relationships as females, more so typically than males do. But sex is the one thing, and I think it's much more connected to our spirituality than we acknowledge, because spirituality, our spiritual connection with God, is how we really get close to God through the Spirit, His Holy Spirit in us. But He's given us this wonderful way to physically connect with a partner, and I think when we have a great sex life, we have a better spiritual connection and vice versa. If you can pray together, that's one of the most intimate things that I can think of, and I've encountered many Christian couples who do not pray together. They pray, but they do not pray together. It's very intimate to get on your knees or lay in bed, hold one another, and really talk to God about your relationship or about your children. It's very, very powerful. So I think we shouldn't separate those two and recognize that they're both beautiful sides to the marriage that God has designed for us to enjoy.
Awesome. Well, Linda, thank you for being
welcome.
with us
You're
today. Really appreciate it. And tune in next time for another episode. Bye.
Bye.